If you're an American conservative, you know that the societal values we hold sacred are under attack. They are hanging in the balance. How can you protect those values? By staying informed. The Closing Argument will deliver news and supporting evidence you need to support and defend those values. Here's Paul Smith.
Good morning. This is Paul Smith, your host of The Closing Argument. In this podcast, we will discuss some of the important but controversial moral, political, and legal issues that affect us and our families today. I have to give you a warning. Some of the things we discuss are not politically correct, and they may offend some people, but we're going to discuss them anyway. This discussion is needed to preserve our liberties, to establish the truth, and to let the world know that there are many people who challenge some of the views that have gained acceptance in our schools, our media, and in our government. Well, I have with me today my good friend Jeff Holtzinger. How are you doing, Jeff?
I'm good.
Good. So Jeff is a lawyer and an engineer. He's been in practice of law here in Maryland for about 28 years, and before that was an engineer, and he still does both of these works. And Jeff was mayor of the city of Frederick, Maryland. I think it was like 2005 to 2009, I believe.
In that range, yep.
And I served on the Board of Aldermen with Jeff at that time. That's how we became good friends. So we're going to talk about climate change. I have written the book, The Climate Change Hoax Argument. It was published in 2021. This is a very timely and important issue. It was said, well, to start with Joe Biden at his inauguration in 2021, he said the science is settled. We need to move on and make drastic changes in energy production in America because fossil fuels are going to destroy the earth. But there are many scientists, in fact, thousands, who dispute the whole claim as well as many parts of it. And as I have gotten into this, I think this is something that needs to be said because the consequences of taking these dire economic changes in what we do with energy is not going to stop the climate change that is occurring. It is going to be economically devastating, and frankly, it'll end up hurting the poor more than anyone else. So, well, let's get into this right away. One of the first things I want to bring to your attention is there's an EPA report that was published in 2010 entitled Climate Change Indicators in the United States. This is probably a good source for a lot of people who want to get into climate change. But as you'll see when I read this, I actually have found the scientists dispute virtually every point in this report. Let me just summarize what the report says. It says that CO2 increases account for 80% of global warming increases, that almost all of the CO2 increases are due to human activities, that the rate of sea level rise has accelerated, that the ocean has become more acidic, that the intensity of hurricanes has risen noticeably, and it also expresses concerns that droughts may also be increasing recently. Interestingly, there are scientists that dispute every one of these. And because of the claim of President Joe Biden and others that the science is settled, that the debate is over, and again, wanting to do extremely expensive and harmful projects, we need to go back and realize that science doesn't support this. The debate is not over. There are too many scientists who dispute these things. Do you have any thoughts on this?
I think it's right. I think it's the only way they win with this because many of the things that they predicted are not coming true. And as we talked about, the narrative has changed from global warming to climate change because some of the warming trends or some of the things they predicted have not come true. And, according to some of the politicians that are in favor of these drastic environmental measures, have made predictions that, the earth it'll be too late in 9 years, 12 years. Well, we're well into those periods and we don't see those changes. So their best way to combat this is to claim there's no more argument about the science, even though none of them really have any sound basis to say that.
Yeah, it seems to me, and I've watched this issue in the media and as well as in government for about 20 years, that there's no debate about the science. And in fact, it's just if you don't agree with this catastrophic opinion, you are a denier and you don't follow the science.
They were on the leading end of cancel culture if you denied what they were claiming was settled science.
So I think everyone must acknowledge, if you have followed this issue, that there has been virtually no discussion and debate of the scientific foundations of climate change.
In fact, I was at a continuing legal education seminar that it had to do with some of the studies that the stormwater regulations are based on, as far as, some of the same type of scientific principles. And I raised the fact that EPA was basing a lot of these modeling on on what's going into water on a failed a flawed analysis. And the presenters at this conference they were folks high up in Pennsylvania's Department of Environmental Protection. They got very upset that I even raised that point. And, I'm just someone attending it, and they seem to be very agitated that I dare raise that.
I think that's their defense mechanism, but that clearly is what has controlled the discussion. There has been no debate, and they just ridicule deniers, they call them. But it's been my conclusion that there are thousands of scientists who dispute this. And so those who insist the debate is over and refuse to acknowledge and respond to the allegations that we're going to discuss here, and which I discussed in my book, The Climate Change Hoax Argument, they cannot in good faith refuse this debate. To do so is actually dishonest. And so the conclusions that we're going to discuss, I mean, I have my opinions, but I'm not a scientist, but I am, I think, reasonably intelligent person, and the conclusions I've made are based on the conclusions of scientists, and we're going to discuss some of those conclusions. The bottom line here is, are humans, through the burning of fossil fuels, causing the Earth to be destroyed if we don't drastically stop it and take other measures within the next, now it's down to 8 years. One of the first things I think you need to know is what the IPCC is. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about global warming today. We're going to get into other aspects of climate change in the next two broadcasts, including the CO2 emissions and others. But you need to understand what the IPCC is. It's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, a United Nations organization that was established in 1988 to address climate issues. It was formed for the purpose of building the scientific case that humans are causing global warming. That's according to Dr. Roy Spencer. And the IPCC, though it's not a scientific group, it has attracted a lot of scientists to try to help it. But its purpose has been a political one, to convince the world that that humans are damaging the climate and the earth. And though their intentions may have been good, what has happened is they have been believed that this was so, thought the science would support it. But now it's turning out the science does not support some of the excesses of their views. So the IPCC, you will hear that term a lot, and it has been co-opted by people who have a narrative they want to prove. And especially in recent years, many of the scientists who initially were supporting them have abandoned ship because the IPCC has been found to manipulate data, to omit views it didn't want, it has made some fake confidential interviews and done a number of things that are just not scientifically proper. Ever heard of the IPCC?
Yes.
Okay. So at this point, the integrity of the IPCC has been compromised. Now you'll see this as we go along, but I had to tell you a little bit about the IPCC as we start, because they have become the main driver behind this. Let's talk a little bit about global warming. Has there been global warming, Jeff?
Not in my opinion, or not to any significant degree.
What I've read is, I think most of the scientists agree that there's been a very slight amount of global warming. Wrightstone said that in the last 167 years, there's been a 1.5 degree Fahrenheit increase in average global temperatures. And I've read a number of scientists. I don't think that's much disputed. But is that too much? Is that going to cause, what damage is that going to cause?
Well, yeah, I think that's something that is one of the points that you raised that needs to be explored, and it shouldn't be concluded that that increase is going to cause all these harms. I think I shared with you an example where I attended a seminar where scientists were taking a graph similar to what you said with the IPCC, manipulating data. And in this case, there was an X and Y axis. The X axis represented the interval in years between these peaks in heating. And their point was that they're trying to show that our carbon footprint was causing these heating peaks. Well, someone in the audience who was very familiar with the information, it was some type of mechanical engineer, very calmly and politely just said, hey, make the intervals on the X-axis more proportional to the Y-axis, the degrees. And what you saw is the writing was so small you couldn't read this if you were in the audience at first and didn't know to question it like he did. And it showed there was a natural heating cycle for Earth every 700 years. And what it also showed is that the carbon footprint didn't cause these peaks. There was a minor exacerbation after the peaks. And it was funny, you could see the folks that were the so-called scientists that were presenting this became increasingly kind of nervous, and you could literally see the sweat coming off their forehead because they know they had just been called on manipulating this data by someone who used only the information they had just presented, but they had manipulated the graph to try to make the point, the political point they were trying to sell.
It's too bad we can't put a graph on the radio, but by just messing around with the axis, the horizontal and vertical axis, you can make a slight increase look like a really steep slope. Bad.
It happens in my engineering. You have, it's not so much you're trying to manipulate it, but when you do road profiles, you have so you can see the grade, something that'll look a lot steeper on your plans is really not as steep as you think, but you have to do that to be able to show different aspects of the road profile. They just used it for a twisted reason when they did these graphs that I was in that seminar I attended.
So some of the things I read indicate that if you go back even go back 400,000 years, somehow the scientists can do this. They're able to track temperature changes, and there's been a fluctuation in temperatures in the Earth of 10 degrees centigrade during the last 400,000 years, according to some of the scientists. And even in the last 50,000 years, according to Jousel, a 2007 study, there's been a variation of 8 degrees centigrade. So that the temperatures have risen, let's say 2 degrees Fahrenheit in 167 years. I don't think the scientists dispute that, but I don't think that's enough to of itself conclude that the world is going to be heading for disaster. And by the way, some of these increases can actually have a positive effect. And by the way, what is the ideal temperature of the Earth? I don't know that we're there. I haven't seen studies that have established that. So the mere fact that there's been these increases in global temperatures does not prove that we're on our way to destruction. I mentioned, I don't think I did mention, in 1995, the IPCC presented a report by Benjamin Santer that showed between 1963 and 1987, the average world temperatures increased about a half a degree centigrade during a short period of time. And this was found to be alarming. However, when you go back, and if you just go back a few years earlier and a few years later, these warming trends were preceded by colder temperatures and were